Hi, everybody, and welcome to another edition of our Immersive Media Trailblazers. Thank you for joining. I think I'll do a quick intro and I will leave some time for a few more people to dial in. We're supposed to have a big attendance tonight, and everybody's going to be up for a treat because we have a great guest today, Casey Farina. Hi, Casey.
Hi, everybody. How's it going?
So Casey and I met through an AR exhibition in Scottsdale called Canal Convergence. And I was so amazed by his work that I thought he should absolutely be part of this program. And he's got some great insights to share about his work, obviously his personal artistic direction, but also we're going to be talking a little bit about tools and techniques that he uses in creating his work. If you want to see some of his work, just wait a few seconds. I think Casey is going to show us a little bit what he does. There's also his Instagram here, so that you can go to and kind of get a feel for what he's doing day in and day out. So, Casey, it's a great pleasure to have you. You've been, a fixture in the digital art landscape in the Phoenix area. You've been named Multimedia Artist of the Year in Phoenix. And I think some of the work that we're going to be talking about and showing in a second is going to be, I'm sure, an eye-opener for most people on the call. So without further ado, I will pass it on to you. And if you could just tell us a little bit about your journey as an artist and how you started in immersive media and kind of what's your direction artistically?
Okay, thank you, Nicola. Thank you very much for the introduction and for the invite. My name's Casey Farina. I'm in Phoenix, Arizona, and I've worked with Nicola and Hoverlay before on an augmented reality project. And my background is that I started my journey as a creative person as a musician and percussionist, and became, if you're familiar with being a percussionist, especially in an orchestral setting, you're in the back of the orchestra, and percussion is drums or anything that you hit, but it's also just anything that no one else plays. If anybody writes an orchestra piece and there's not someone to do it, then it gets handed off to the percussionists. And so I learned about wearing a lot of different hats and doing a lot of different things. That was sort of the start of my artistic life. And I got into new music and electronic music. And then from electronic music, I started experimenting in video and digital video. And that took me into animation and digital media more broadly over the course of 15 to 20 years or so. And so let me go ahead and share my screen. There we go. Is everybody seeing my screen now?
Yep.
Okay, great. And so I'll just let some of my reel play here. And over the last 10 years or so, as I've been making artwork that includes animation and audio, a lot of it has been inspired by algorithmic and audiovisual processes. In my artist statement, I refer to these as iterative processes, in that a lot of the work I make is algorithmically designed and designed not to repeat. It's sort of there's an algorithm, fundamental set of rules. A lot of times the rules and the nature of what's going on are inspired by different scientific processes. So either microscopic processes or macro processes like cosmology, cosmic movement. And so mixing and drawing from those kind of things has informed a lot of this kind of work. And so a lot of it is made by creating very, very small, tiny agents that have a lot of times very, very simple rules A lot of these concepts have been heavily influenced by sort of the ideas behind cellular automata, a new kind of science, and Stephen Wolfram, that whole branch of what's happening in the scientific world today. Not nearly as complicated, but sort of drawing on that idea that complexity emerges from these systems at scale with very, very small, simple rules. And so a lot of these systems are set up in ways that are inspired, manners that's inspired by that. The sort of start of my journey was, like I said, a music and an electronic music. And very early on, I started to see this connection between generating electronic sound and generating images. And so this first manifested itself as animated graphic scores. There's this tradition in music of notating music, not with standard notes on a clef like you would find in a typical piece of sheet music, but rather with abstract visuals as a way to notate or write down or provide directions for abstract music or music that isn't typically couldn't be notated as well using traditional music notation. And so this is one of my first or second ideas about that. This is a piece called Forest Line Border, where it's an abstract notation for visual music. And so it's, for a trio of musicians. And essentially I created the animation and then they interpret it live as a performance. And so this was a lot of the beginning of what I was doing, what I'm doing now as an animator, is that this idea of trying to visualize sound, which is not a new idea. That goes back to the very beginnings of animation. Fantasia is the one that everyone recognizes right away. But some of the very first experiments in animation were Oscar Fischinger and the attempts to manifest synesthesia, the idea of artistic gesture crossing between different sensory modalities. The idea, visualizing sound or, seeing sound. And so this was an attempt to sort of codify that idea. And this, I continue to explore these ideas. Recently, they've taken the form of artifacts, where I'm incorporating sound and visual algorithmic video into these sort of installation pieces that are a combination of laser cut acrylic and video screens. And here you can see some excerpts from an installation at the Phoenix Art Museum that included projected video and several of these artifacts, physical things that you can have in a room that essentially are, the video screens playing generative systems. And then the surrounding sculpture part was also generated from similar algorithms and sort of frozen in time in multiple layers of laser cut acrylic. And that's one manifestation of these ideas that I've been working with recently. And one of the other primary ones is using augmented reality and Hoverlay to create this piece called Keeping Time. This is how I met Nicola. And this, I believe the term I settled on here was augmented reality kinetic sculpture. And so I'll let this play for a minute here. You should be able to hear some of the sound. And so this is a augmented reality artwork, kinetic sculpture. And so these large temple bell inspired structures are surrounded by these smaller orbiting structures. and it's all synchronized to just like a developing, changing score. So it's driven by the sound, and each movement corresponds to sound, sound that's happening. Essentially, this very atomic level linking of sound and movement. And so, again, another way of getting at the idea of, notating sound through movement. This piece was debuted at Hoverlay or at Canal Convergence in 2020. Is that right? 2020.
Yeah, so. Yeah.
Yeah. And was sort of virtually located at several different locations at Canal Convergence. Canal Convergence is a light and art festival that's primarily housed along the canal in Scottsdale, Arizona. And this is viewed through the Hoverlay application. So a person tunes into my channel and the bells and their structures form around them. And then the whole process starts. This piece is heavily inspired by Southeast Asian music, gamelan music. It's been an interest of mine for a long time. As a percussionist, that's essentially an orchestra of metallophones, different pieces of metal that are struck, and it's very layered and it's very cyclical. And so this is, drawing on both of those ideas, and that there's a visual cycle of these four bells forming around you and they're orbiting. And then around each of the bells, there's, micro cycles that are happening in how far each of these structures moves and how it, the speed at which it orbits the larger structure. And then there's as it plays for a little while, there's a fifth sort of entity that appears above in the sky, over top of the viewer. And this was in augmented reality. This is an idea that I've been a fan of this type of music for a long time, and been exploring different ways to sort of include these types of ideas in my artwork. But this was something that was really not able to manifest in any other way. This is the video of the piece, but actually bringing it to life in AR in a way that that someone can sort of move through the space and walk up closer to one of the bells, and the scale, is something that would not be achievable really in any other format. It's certainly not with my level of resources. I'm not the kind of person who can smelt a 35-foot bell, anytime soon. And so this was a way to manifest this idea, which really, only through augmented reality would this type of idea be possible, especially with the sort of rhythmic intricacy and this connection between sound and image. This has been sort of the thread of all of my creative activities, this idea of visualizing sound or manifesting sound and motion and an image. And this was a way to do that I thought worked really well.
Yeah, and I thought one thing that was particularly striking is this balance between an object that looks very real, at the same time is not bounded by any physical limitation, and those other elements that are completely virtual. I thought it was a very fascinating combination. I think one thing that could be really interesting for those in the audience that are maybe wondering some of the techniques you use to produce a piece like this, if you wouldn't mind maybe showing a little bit of your tools, your workflows, how do you produce, how do you create a piece like that? I'm sure it could be inspirational for some, and maybe a good source of ideas on how to proceed.
Sure, absolutely. Let's look here. So this was a combination of a few things. So I teach animation and digital media at Glendale Community College, in addition to being an artist. And I teach a lot of digital animation classes. And so a lot of this is leveraged using the tools, I'm teaching all the time and using in my personal artwork. So constructing the bells, this is a combination of 3D modeling tools and texturing tools. And so the shape itself isn't super intricate, but I had this I wanted it to look like this very weathered, this very aged component. This something, not new and flashy and glossy like sometimes people think of when they think of 3D computer graphics, but something that had wear and tear on it. And so the mesh itself was designed in Cinema 4D, is the 3D mesh authoring software that I prefer. And it does a lot of the same things that all of these programs do, Cinema 4D or Blender or 3ds Max, Maya are the ones that a lot of people use. And then this is an application called Substance Painter, which is now part of the Adobe family. And this is, I think, a program that's been around for a few years now, but has made the idea about making these really very intricate, interesting textures much more doable. And so I can sort of step through. It's essentially Photoshop on a mesh. Photoshop actually does allow you to break in meshes, but this is, I think, a little bit designed for that purpose from the ground up. And so building different layers here, layers that either change the appearance of raising or lowering the surface, layers that, for instance, all of these tiny little nodules, that was a separate paint layer. A lot of this is manifesting the idea of visual layers as data. And so a lot of this is black and white data or black and white masks that are being applied to either roughness or shininess or different layers of disruption that are happening on the surface until you get down to sort of the fundamental layer. And so that's the sort of original mesh shape that I started with. And then as you add different components here on the way up, we start to get different layers appearing. And you can see how each of these contributes to forming the overall object. And working in this particular format, it also allows you to export your work in a variety of resolutions and formats. So I could send this out as a very, very high resolution texture for a still, like a promotional still or something that's going to be printed. And I could also export this in a lower resolution, something that can be used for real-time 3D, which is what's happening in Hoverlay and any augmented reality application, is that your computer needs to render all of this stuff, or your phone in this case needs to render all of these things right now, right on the screen as you're watching it. And so that requires that not only you're able to create the assets, but that the assets themselves are reasonably efficient. And so at this point, it gets handed off to Unity 3D. And so this is Unity here, where I would sort of assemble all of the different components. Let's see if I can move this down. Play. And get all of the animation happening. You can sort of see how everything's laid out here, the different components, and here's the structure of what's going on, with the main bell and the different things that orbit. These are sort of driven by these individual algorithms that orbit them around the larger structure. And so Unity 3D is a program that interfaces directly with Hoverlay, so I can output a file format that can be dropped right into Hoverlay and then put into an augmented reality experience. It's Unity does a lot of things, but it's primarily for authoring real-time 3D results. And so the main thing that Unity is used for is making video games. And so this program does a lot of different things, but it's optimized because of the video game world for real-time three-dimensional applications, so that everything that happens in here can be viewed in real time, as opposed to what's happening in like a Hollywood film, where there's a lot of computer graphics being leveraged, but it's offline. You know, they can take a long time to render all of those frames in the superhero movies because, you know, it doesn't need to be happening right now. It can be, you know, take a, you know, many computers a long amount of time to draw all of those graphics. But here, this is all optimized so that it's able to be drawn right now on your phone. And so then this is output to Unity, or sorry, to Hoverlay from Unity. So I suppose the overall workflow here was, you know, the initial modeling of this, and then the texturing of the bell to create the visual asset, and then into Unity here for building all of the animation and the movement. And then this gets handed off into Hoverlay so that it can be put on Hoverlay channel and then linked to a specific location in real world space. And this particular augmented reality experience was set to be relative to the user. So when someone would launch this piece, the bells would appear around them, as opposed to, if you've done any augmented reality before, the other way to anchor something is to anchor it to some sort of image in the real world. And this one didn't have an anchoring image. It was rather that you yourself were the anchor, so that you started off immersed in the experience.
Yeah, and I think, Casey, I think this is a great example of you know, kind of an end-to-end workflow. I think your point on thinking in terms of an AR consumption, you know, like how do you design assets that are visually striking, but they are optimized for a kind of a mobile phone and real-time rendering versus kind of more you know, kind of this cinema special effect kind of workflow. Since you've been teaching for many years, do you have other thoughts and, I would say, best practices or advice that you could share with, you know, people on the call? And by the way, you know, if you have questions, you know, we'll have plenty of time for questions in a few minutes. But just wondering if there is any kind of aha moment or things you could share that would be helpful for the audience today.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, I teach this on a regular basis, and I would encourage everyone not to be intimidated by the tools. Like a lot of, I'm sure everybody here has some experience with, you know, different digital authoring tools, and there's always this tension between the tool design and the tool use, and, you know, tool designers are focused on expanding the different types of things you can do with each of the tools. But that doesn't mean you need to learn all the features of every program. This is something I try to express to my students often and early, is that especially for people coming in with some sort of artistic vision, is that finding someone with some experience and being able to drill down on a few things, because the individual tools themselves and the functions are usually not overly complicated. It's just a matter of finding that one application or one tool within a certain tool set that's going to open up a whole world for what you're doing. And in terms of augmented reality here, that it isn't just, you know, three-dimensional things. There's a lot that can be done just by organizing two-dimensional assets in three-dimensional space. And so just any drawing, painting, photograph, video, something that's a two-dimensional asset, just taking that thing and organizing it in three-dimensional space can be a whole world of interesting ideas. Some of the things that, if we look, let me see if I can open up. I gave a talk recently at a workshop we had in Phoenix, where I put together some examples where just combining some of standard two-dimensional assets with things that are happening in here we go. Combining two-dimensional assets with some of the things that are happening in 3D, sort of simply, the idea of particle systems, where very interesting dynamic ideas. This is essentially, most particle systems are, just a system for emitting two-dimensional assets. Most particle systems like this is not a three-dimensional thing. This is merely a source, an emitter that's emitting two-dimensional objects that are themselves always orienting towards the viewer. And so this is something that can also be accomplished in augmented reality. And so you could sort of create the illusion of three-dimensional things just by taking a two-dimensional thing and always having it always point at the camera. This is a huge well of possibilities here, applying that idea, like something like this, which looks like a more complex, fog or cloud of some kind, is actually just a series of two-dimensional planes. They're just being generated and changing color slowly over time. And so there's a lot to be done. I think you can get a lot done.
Great examples.
Quickly, as students and different people I've worked with gain more experience, they're obviously their skills expand and they can do different things. But I would say that having a guide who can sort of point you in the right direction as far as focus on this part of the tool or that part of the tool, once you have that sort of guidance, being able to drill down on that kind of thing is not super intimidating, right? The individual components here are not overly complicated, but just sort of that initial finding your way, because all the programs do a million different things, but really, I probably only use 5 of them. But your 5 may be different, but being able to guide someone to that particular 5 things, especially, in an instance like this, where a lot of people are artists with pre-existing ideas that they just want to translate into the digital realm. That's a lot of what I've been doing. A lot of the people who are taking my classes now in Phoenix are, artists, mural artists, people like that, people who have pre-existing ideas about what their art's like and, have a visual language that just need help translating it into the digital realm, and, where they can leverage a digital tool in order to, make their non-digital art more dynamic and more interesting.
And it's true that with AR, I think it opens up, a whole side of the digital world with gaming technology that have, it's super powerful, but it was somewhat siloed for years and evolved in its own way to support, gaming and to some extent entertainment. But now is, I think, becoming more of a base, technology base for art. And I think there's a body of knowledge that I think is not necessarily commonplace. I think I'm really glad that you're able to show those examples, because you're right that they could be created relatively simply in terms of assets, but they're very visually effective. So this is great. So maybe before we jump to the question, there are quite a few questions lined up. I just want to first thank you and ask you, maybe as a last thought, where you think you'll be heading. I mean, this technology is really at a very interesting juncture in AR, but in general, immersive media. What are your thoughts about what's next for you artistically?
I'm interested in expanding this idea of sound and image a little further. And so trying to work my way around some technical limitations to really drill down on this idea of, generative systems. I'm really attracted to the idea that the artwork itself is a series of instructions. It doesn't really repeat. It just continues to evolve and change over time. I've tried to leverage that in the past a bunch of different ways. At one point, I made a piece that took live Twitter input and then visualized that, and also drawing on other sort of constantly changing source material that would then manifest in this changing way. The augmented reality part of it, I think it's just such a great canvas as far as getting your artwork off a screen. I mean, technically it's still on a screen, right? You're outside your house looking at it on a different screen. And so I think that's a step forward here in terms of what's going on. And the idea that this type of technology can be occupied by artistic thought, I think is the thing I'm putting forward now. Is just speaking to someone about it this morning. There's a lot of different future casting about what's going on with this. Blade Runner is the movie that comes up often, the one that I discussed often in my proposals for these types of projects.
Yep.
In that this type of space, this digital visual space, could be totally occupied by advertising, but I don't think that's the world any of us want to live in. And putting more art into this space as a way to counterbalance what'll inevitably be the push to commercialize these kind of spaces, I think is important to do it early and to do it often. And we're still in the early and often stage of what we're doing here with this.
Yeah, this is right. Great way to wrap up your presentation. I completely concur with you. I think it's a really important thought. So
yeah, not every digital technology needs to be leveraged for monetization. Yeah.
Right. And I think, one of the advantages I think we have is that we're starting fresh and we kind of know where things go when when we don't act early or take care about those things. So
yes, let's hope we've all learned from some of this.
Yep. All right. Thank you, Casey. So let me just open it up for questions here. I'll start from the top. So Ron had a questions about, do you have any example of musicians' responses to your images, which are stunning, by the way?
Sure. Let me play a little bit more of this one. So if I can drill down a little bit more deeply on this. Are you guys hearing this?
Yes.
So this piece, this is a animated visual score. And so the instructions that the players receive, the performers, is that each player gets a third of the screen, and you're supposed to represent the images that are happening on that third. And then throughout the piece, I subvert those expectations in that I make some images that transcend those boundaries, and the players are supposed to interpret and come to grips with that. And so, for instance, here's part of it. I'll let this play for a second. And so this player reaction to what's going on is 3 clarinets, and they've been augmented with electronics. And so the player in the middle is interpreting that line. The player on the left has this one type of noise, and the player on the right has this generative branching idea to represent. And then at times, these boundaries between the different sections break down. So this piece on the left is moving between players, and while the player on the right is trying to represent this noisy line. And a lot of these, in this section, a lot of these individual images were created by tracing physics simulations. So it'd set up like big towers of blocks and then knock them over in the computer, but you wouldn't see the blocks. You would just see the lines of where the blocks went. And I've done a couple pieces like this piece, and another one called Bit Smoke is another animated graphic score. And that's, there's a couple different versions of that on my website, caseyfarina.com.
Great. Ron, did that answer your question?
Actually, it provoked even more thoughts. Casey, this stuff is incredible.
Oh, thank you.
I started to wonder, for example, whether you're talking about some of your classes, I guess, in wherever it is, Phoenix or Scottsdale, whether they could be a combination, they could combine in the class both visual artists and auditory artists to work together to come up with some ideas about that. And then I pushed even further to wonder whether there was a way of engaging the public, if you will, in the creation of some of these, excuse me, in the creation of some of these pieces, because you've really broken out, it seems to me, the boundaries of what is possible, both visually and auditorily, and I think also in terms of just human and civic engagement. So I guess I will shut up and drop the mic.
Yeah, absolutely. So part of the thing that melted down some of these boundaries for me originally was, I got interested in electronic music, and then I became a research assistant at what used to be called the Institute for Studies in the Arts at Arizona State University. That was around in the late 90s, early 2000s. And that institute was all about crossing these sort of boundaries. And so musicians and engineers and artists and scientists all working together. And so I was in that, the thick of what was going on with that at the time. And that sort of, opened my eyes to a million different things, and has stayed with me since. Now that has been supplanted by something I believe called the AME at ASU, Arts, Media, and Engineering Consortium, or something to that effect, at Arizona State. But I teach community college. So there's what we're doing there is trying to prepare people for more typical kind of work, but we do a lot of incorporating sound and music together in, both my class. I mean, when I teach, it just sort of comes out, I'm teaching a lot of artists to make sounds or just experiment with making sounds for their own work. That's not off limits to them, because there's a lot of tools now that make these things a lot more accessible, even if you don't have a typical music background. And we do things where we, cross boundaries between classes, and that my students will design a video game, and, the sound design class will come in, and we try to get them to work together, to varying degrees of success. But this is a constant struggle between the, developing expertise within a field and then being able to think outside that box and connect dots. So we're trying to do this in a lot of different ways. As far as getting the public involved, I guess I haven't done, the closest thing I've done directly to that was my just sort of like interpreting of the public through Twitter. So the Twitter piece I did, let me pull this up here. This was a piece I did with a friend of mine, a musician and composer, Jeremy Mueller, and you might be able to see him here. And so we were harvesting tweets. So you're able to, if you sign up for the Twitter API, you grabbed tweets based on a hashtag. And I believe when we set it up so that when we launched the piece, it grabbed whatever the top trending hashtag was at that time. And we had some of those tweets appearing on the right, some of them appearing over here on the left. And then those tweets sort of appeared here in the middle as particles that kind of got filtered down and eventually became visual gesture that he was there as a musician interpreting live. So sort of an indirect connection to the public there, as far as grabbing what's going on. I mean, I've had ideas about taking this concept further, where instead of just representing text tweets, you're actually grabbing images coming down off the internet through some sort of fire hose. I don't know if this is even open anymore. This was a few years ago, as far as whether or not the Twitter API has gone through some changes, whether you can actually harvest the Twitter API in the same way right now. That's always changing because it's a private company and they can turn it on or turn it off. But yeah, now that it may be easier to sort of grab these images, something like that I think could be really interesting.
Well, another fascinating piece. So next, I think question was from Angelique Ledoux. Angelique, do you want to ask a question directly? You want me to read it?
Sure. It was really just about process. And the question is like, can you describe or tell us a little bit more, less about the tools piece, but more about your process from concept to final product? Like, do you map it, like visualization process for you? What does that look like?
Yeah, there's sketching and mapping that happens at the beginning, and then it inevitably runs into the what finally manifests itself in the final product. And so most of these ideas start off as pretty simple concepts that arrive kind of fully formed, like the keeping time piece. That image of the bells was sort of there from the beginning, and then it was just a matter of trying to figure out how to make that happen. A lot of these pieces end up being proposals of some kind, and so my process often here, if I can get back to my page, includes a lot of pre-visualization. So it's like a sketch, and then it becomes a pre-visualization, and that's sort of been developed by my work teaching animation and visual effects, in that this was a piece here that I did. This is a physical installation, but this was probably 2 years before the actual physical installation. And so as part of my proposals, I really try to make a version on screen that's as close to the real thing as possible. So this was like an art installation that had 4 different interactive zones. And so, this has become part of my process for pretty much everything at this point, is that I try to get as close as I can to create, like a real accurate pre-visualization. And sometimes solving some of the problems to get the previs to happen spills over into the, hopefully solving some of those problems equates to solving some of the problems that take to, build it IRL, in real life. But this was the pre-visualization for this project. And here's what the final thing ended up looking like. Obviously there's a lot of distance between those two things, but as a result of, trying to get things to happen. But this was a lot of what ended up, I think I have to walk around it here at some point, but so this is a lot of, initial sketches, sort of an idea, and then this, tries to be as accurate as possible pre-visualization. It helps me sort of solve a lot of the artistic problems early on, in that, by creating this high fidelity previs, I can tell whether it's good or not, or just like, this isn't, the more I work on this, the less compelled I am to continue working on it, or, but I can also tweak things then at that point. And then it's also, great for the proposal part of it, in that I don't need to rely on the people I'm proposing things to imagine stuff, I try to hand off as close a thing as I can. And so that's a big part of it then.
Thanks, Casey. Next question, Elizabeth. Do you want to? I think I should probably take this one, but Elizabeth.
Yeah, I was just curious about how you work from Unity. Was that one scene that then is exported from Unity and dropped into Hoverlay as a GLTF file? And how do you keep your file size nice and tiny?
So in that case, that one didn't really work as a GLTF. It's a Unity asset bundle, and Hoverlay now has a very convenient, awesome plugin that makes that essentially one click to create an asset bundle from your Unity scene. And then that asset bundle can be literally drag and dropped into the Hoverlay Spaces interface. And so the reason the animation didn't seem to translate to the GLTF consistently in my case, which is one of the reasons I didn't go with that. And then also trying to maintain the audio-visual synchronization was not really happening. And so for those two reasons, the Unity asset bundle was a better route for me. And yeah, so the compression. So to get it, usable on your phone. So the Substance Painter output, I could just continually squish it until I got it to a point where, I thought it looked good enough, and it was small to keep on the phone. There's compression coming out of Unity in terms of the compressing the keyframe storage. And then Nicola, there's compression happening on your end too, right?
Mm-hmm.
As far as some smushing that happens
Yep.
there. So those layers of compression help to keep it down. So this piece here, this is not augmented reality. This is on a real screen. Something like this, probably wouldn't translate with the same sort of fidelity. There's just sort of like a lot of stuff going on here. But yeah, so there's many opportunities for compression as far as the texture size, the animation size, and then ultimately like the just file delivery. This allows you to try to bake things down at multiple instances. And there's all sorts of different ways to approach that. I know you guys just also recently did a piece where you sort of compressed a bunch of animation into a video shader, right? Whose piece was that, Nicola? The name's escaping.
Was that at Cal Convergence?
Yeah.
With Nancy Baker.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so there's different opportunities. This was Hoverlay. I also showed this at the Currents New Media Festival in New Mexico, and this is kind of like a glitch. But as the train went by, the phone got a little confused, and so the bells themselves got stuck to the train and just got drug off into the distance. As long as you're not pointing it at a train, I think it works pretty good. So.
That's a funny example, actually.
Yeah.
And by the way, for those of you who are interested in a Unity plugin, I pasted the link it's in the documentation, the Spaces documentation. It's relatively new. You will need a channel that has that turned on. So if you're in the Creator Ambassadors program, you will have access as well. If not, just contact me if you want to join that program. If you're an artist, we can add you to that program as well. All right, so who do we have next? Camilio Camille, you still here? Yes. Camille, you had a question about photogrammetry and AR in art.
So I know you guys have links to a couple of different things on your site of pieces that were based on photogrammetry. That's not a huge part of my workflow right now, but yeah, these were, designed assets. But the tools for doing that are getting better and better all the time, especially on iOS and iPhone. I know the Android tools are a little, but on iOS, because all the phones have that additional depth camera, the Sketchfab, what is it? Reality capture? Reality capture? Yeah. I believe, is that still in beta or can you just download it? I forget.
You can download it. I think it's part of Epic Games, I think now.
Oh, right. They bought Sketchfab.
Sketchfab family. Yeah.
Right. That makes the photogrammetry process a matter of just sort of moving your phone around an object. Now, the bit of photogrammetry I've done is that having some 3D skills are going to be super useful in terms of cleaning up what you get out of the photo, the output of the photogrammetry, that's still being able to edit things into the format that you want. There's a program the program I've used most for photogrammetry is called Meshroom, like mushroom, but with a mesh, MESH at the beginning. That's a free open source app that runs not on your phone, but on the computer, where you're taking pictures at different angles around an object and then extrapolating a mesh from that. For those of you interested, all of my teaching is freely available online. If you just Google Casey Farina YouTube, all of my stuff comes up there. Now, it's not for that, this is my primary mode of communicating to my students. So it's not exactly formatted for the public, but it is publicly available, on purpose, so people can access these things. But I have, a lot of content up here on this channel, and it's all searchable, working with Cinema 4D and Substance Painter and After Effects, and creating assets for real-time 3D and rendered offline 3D. And so there's a lot of things there, and I'm monitoring this all the time. So if anyone has any questions, I interact with everybody in the comments and so on and so forth.
That's great to know. This is a great resource, I'm sure. I'll get the link and I will paste it in the chat for everybody as well. And also, Camille, there's another artist who did the session similar to what we're doing now, who's doing exclusively photogrammetry. His name is John Craig Freeman. So you may want to look also for his the recording of his session. I think that might be something that, if you're interested in the topic, would be valuable. All right, so Peter Williams. Peter, are you there?
Yeah, hi, thank you.
Hi, Peter.
Hi, Peter.
I really have enjoyed your presentation, Casey. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I was quite curious. You began by talking about generative art, and I'm curious if you've found that or ways of incorporating that in real time within AR.
The keeping time piece is the patterns in the music are all generative, and the way this works now is that the actual presentation of it is like a recording of the generative output, and so that's kind of a limitation for right now that really has, if the generative part of it, I can run generatively here in Unity, but the cell phone infrastructure as it exists now, doesn't allow for us to constantly send new code to everybody's phone all the time for security reasons. So a lot of what I end up doing in these kind of instances is recording a long generative output and presenting that. And so this is like a compromise I've had to make in not only in augmented reality, but in a lot of different instances. I've done these public projected, like projection mapping installations, for instance, and a lot of times, I'll be designing everything in a generative way, but then the infrastructure to actually have it be constantly generative on site is just not in the cards. And so this is a projection mapping installation I did in Tempe, Arizona, where this was projection mapped onto, this is an old flour mill that's in Tempe. If you're familiar with Tempe at all, this is the Hayden flour mill. And so this was something where all of it was generative. I took captured some digital images of this weathered wall and then used that and sort of brought back some of the previous, not ancient, but older advertising that had existed on the wall, and then built some other generative things off of the patterns on the wall. But then it was not possible to have a computer running this live so that it would be, constantly generative. And so in instances like this, I'll record, an output of, 15, 20, 30 minutes. And then, it's a video loop of the generative output. And so it's always a trade-off as far as those things. There's very few instances where I've been able to have something running live, so that it would be truly generative, quote unquote, all the time. In that, in order to present this, there's the two different ends of the continuum there. In order to present it to more people, some compromises need to be made in the actual presentation of the thing. And so in order to get this to fit on this tiny little stand and sit outside in the weather, I had to run everything on a Raspberry Pi computer, which would not be able to actually generate any of these images. And so the Raspberry Pi is sort of running just playing back the loop and mapping it onto the space. So yeah, there's always a tension between those two things in order to, actually present the work. A lot of times I can't, my visual language is such that I can't run the algorithms I'm interested in running on older hardware. And so it's more, I need to compromise in that, I record the output of this generative language in order to have a more viewable presentation of it. So, those are the compromises I make, in presenting my art. If my visual language were different, maybe it would be easier to run truly generative versions of these things in different instances. It just depends. When it's interactive, that definitely requires the computer to be running in real time. And so, for instance, like this piece, that was like an interactive version of what was going on here. But this was a short-term thing. This happened over the course of a weekend. Was taking live connect input into the system, so people were able to control different agents in this system. But this didn't live somewhere for 2 months. It lived somewhere for 1 weekend. So there's always that tension between permanence and interactivity, as far as having something sit somewhere for a while versus having it be more like an event.
Thanks, Keith.
Thank you. That projection piece is really beautiful. Thanks for sharing that. And
thank you.
I see there's some very interesting possibilities with, as the technology evolves.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Thank you, Peter. We have one question from somebody that doesn't have a name, so I'm going to say the Zoom user. If I think you're online, so if you want to mute yourself, ask the question, or I can just read what you have.
Apologies, I think that's me. I'm not sure.
Okay, that's okay. I wasn't sure. I didn't want to be, say anything wrong there, but go ahead.
Just assume that my profile logo or like some avatar, some kind of representation of me is up there. Apologies. Yeah, amazing stuff. All of it. I'm just like kind of still processing it as I'm working on an animation for augmented reality for a deadline at the same time. But it's fascinating. It's just absolutely amazing. And thank you for the way that you've explained stuff. And yeah, I'm going to live on your channel for a little while.
Well, thank you very much.
Yeah. My question was just about, there's such a, in terms of augmented reality specifically, there's such a gap currently between like what is feasible and what is really like possible or accessible from a UX place, like inviting people into this like third space where you're creating like invisible art and being like, hey, did you know there's some art of mine here? let me show you. Oh, you got to download it now. I got to download an app. Oh God, and then they download the app, and or the galleries or the exhibition space or whatever it is, the festival has stuff downloaded already on equipment, and then just it doesn't work still, or something happens, and it's always painful and heartbreaking. But and annoying to audiences, which is never great. Yeah, like what was your experience in the Canal show with Hoverlay, and how do you kind of like work, or for you as well, Nicola, like just what's the best kind of way to work around some of the issues that can arise from not working on everybody's phone, or the Wi-Fi or the connectivity, or crashing, or people's actual experiences of it once you've done all the work, and as a communication medium, you would like people to receive it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, allow me to shamelessly promote Nicola and Hoverlay here for a minute, in that I've that tension, as someone who's been messing around with leading edge technology, I guess, for a while, like I think that's always going to be there. I don't see, that's this, my stuff barely worked 15 years ago, and it barely works now. So like, I don't see that changing anytime soon. The presentation of things in AR, I think it's just, the risk versus the reward. Like it is so interesting and so compelling that, it's going to take a while for things to settle. But what Nicola and Hoverlay are doing, I think, is by far the lowest friction, most concise presentation of this technology around. I've gone through a bunch of other hoops to try and do things with my students in other AR platforms. I've gone through the hoops to try and publish my own apps that that would just be an app, not through another system, and it is a nightmare as far as that stuff goes. Like as someone who can put up with some unnecessary complexity in certain situations, I found it to be untenable. And what Nicola and Hoverlay have built is really just the most concise system for doing this. And like as this continues to develop and build out, like I really think what they're doing as far as usability, not only for the people viewing your artwork, but also usability for the artist to be able to assemble the things in augmented reality, is just way ahead of what a lot of other stuff is going on right now.
Well, I'm not sure I can follow that, but thank you, Casey. What I can say is we're also in the middle of our journey. I think we're learning. I think we spend a lot of time on the ground, looking at how people use things, and try to find the best way for people to, anything from, download times to people giving authorization to use the camera, to, all these steps. We try to find really optimal ways to do that, and we try different things so that you don't have to spend the time on those aspects. I feel that there is a change, a very rapid change in terms of devices that, when we started, you need at least an iPhone 6s to run. And even today, we still test on iPhone 6s, and there's a huge gap between what an iPhone 6s can do and an iPhone 12, alone a 13. There's an enormous gap. And I think what were issued 2 years ago, I think are fading away, as far as that kind of the capability of the phone to at least run AR. I think what we're now focused on is those first few steps in the experience. How do we coach people? How to stand, the fact that you can walk, the fact, things are help build literacy in the experience. And, we're going to roll out new, we call that this coaching screen. So you could decide for an experience, how I want to coach the user to be in this position, or I want them to, help them point the phone at the mural, have a little overlay. So we're working on those things so that, this might be a few seconds of the experience, but this might make a difference between somebody being able to enjoy the experience the way you're intended to, or, being kind of lost because they don't know, where to look or things like that.
Yeah, it's wonderful. I'm gonna have to say I'm very new to Hoverlay, and it was Carrie Lau, who formerly of Snap, who runs Blackwood Gallery here in Toronto, who told me about you. And then literally the same day, somebody contacted me from Sketch Working Arts for homeless youth here in Toronto, and asked me to mentor and help out with somebody who did a recent amazing project. And they just, I didn't help them with anything. They spoke for 3 hours about Hoverlay, and I was like, okay, like, hello, Hoverlay. And they did an amazing piece about, their 3 stages of homelessness and all kinds of, they did a whole tour with Hoverlay and stuff. So and I've just started playing with it recently, but it
let us know if you're, if you need access and resources and things like that. I mean, we're still small enough that we can, we really like to work with our users and hear the feedback. So all of the colleges, feel free to, reach out. We have a Slack channel where you can ask questions and find us there. Sure. Yeah. Someone said, can I ask who's speaking? Sorry, my name is Karen Derricates. I'm an artist and media educator here in Toronto. Sorry, I have no idea. Great to meet you. Nice to meet you too. All right. I think a couple of thank you messages. I may miss a question. So if I'm missing, I'm just reading through. Feel free to unmute your phone. And Kimberly, I think you're raising your hand. Just feel free to chime in with your questions. I think we'll try to go another 5 minutes, and then we may have to do another session at some point with other questions.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi. So I've been typing so many notes. I am a newbie. This is Maya. She told me about you guys. You guys have met Maya. Yay. I have some questions. First of all, is this being recorded so that I can review it? Yay. And can we put that link in there, or
we don't have the link yet, but we will email it to you. If you're registered, you will get it. And we have a page on our website, Immersive Media Trailblazers. That's the kind of the name of the program where we find the most interesting people we can find, like Casey, and we have a session with them, and we post that on the website, the Hoverlay website.
Okay, I have like 2 more questions really quick.
Go ahead.
That's okay. Okay, so the other is, I'm currently used to the augmented reality of 2D, so I'm really excited to get into this. And I'd like to know if I or anyone an artist can use professional music to create the works, or do we need to find someone music, or do we need to get authorization? If I purchase songs from iTunes or something, can I do that, or is that a copyright infringement?
It will be just like any other use of music. So if you use it for, let's say, you use somebody's music to put on your YouTube video, you're going to be, you're going to be hit with potentially some copyright infringement. So you need to check if you have the rights, and you can purchase music with the rights as well.
Oh,
so ways to purchase rights. Yeah.
And then my last question is, how do we use this type of art to create an income? That's a big title. Is that a whole different class? I mean, once I do it,
definitely.
Who do I propose it to? The city and all that fun stuff.
Yeah, I think there's I'm in Phoenix, but Phoenix is really Phoenix, Tempe, Glendale, Scottsdale, all these, it's a big blob of cities right here. And all of them are putting calls out now for public art. And I personally know all of those art directors, and they're all interested in doing this type of thing and, engaging the community in this way. So even public art calls that aren't specifically for, technology-based art, I think you're going to find more and more people receptive to proposing this type of work. And then, the funding matter is laying out your budget for doing these types of things and creating these types of works. But I think in terms of public art, that this is, attractive to public art coordinators everywhere, in that it's, forward looking, and it's also, there's less physical logistics that need to go on right now. There's quite a bit of digital technical logistics that need to happen, but people are attracted to the idea of putting, installations places and not having to physically construct a whole bunch of things, and having things exist in digital space is a little bit easier in that way.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we may do a session on that topic. I think at some point, just for artists to understand maybe some of the ways public art organizations are funding their own projects, and maybe some project you could go propose to your local community.
Mm-hmm.
One thing that I can say is that what we've observing is that it's a very community-based medium. It's a little bit like, I often say, FM radio when it started versus, broadcasting everything to everybody. It has a local component. And so I feel like, projects that have a scope that matches a community or a neighborhood, are very well suited for the medium, and I think could be ways to generate income that today is just not, it's just not thought about. So anyway,
Okay.
so I think we should do more on this topic. Yep. Go ahead.
And with that, in that topic, if you can address how to put a number on your work.
Mm-hmm.
So this is like really good, because I have no idea how to price it.
Yeah, I think this would require a whole session. Thank you. This is actually a great seed for a future session. I really appreciate that.
Okay.
Yeah,
okay,
that's a whole.
Sorry.
No, this is very good. So there's a question from Eva that was about sensors you use for interactivity. I think you mentioned the Kinects.
I've used the original Kinect, the Kinect 2. I have an Azure Kinect, which is a new one. That most recent installation used the which one is this? This is the Intel RealSense. This one is nice in that this is the smallest one I've ever had. Like, it's not very big. All of these sensors are connected by the fact that they are no longer manufactured, and companies have completely abandoned them. And the companies being Intel and Microsoft in this case. So yeah, it's sort of a weird area where these kind of things have gotten a little more niche. Everybody thought we were going to use them to play video games for a while, which is why we had the Microsoft Kinect and all of that, but it didn't pan out like they thought. And so yeah, that's the one I used most recently was the Intel RealSense. But we're right at the cusp of doing this, because the machine learning body tracking work that's happening right now is getting very good, kind of indistinguishable. The thing that made these valuable was that they were giving me some data about body position, and that they use a 3D camera, a depth camera, to do that. And now in some instances, you don't need a 3D camera, you just need a camera. And then the machine learning does all of the body interpolation. So that is getting better and better and better all the time. And, next year at this time, we're probably in a post depth camera world where you can just use a camera and then run, some ML driven software to extract sensor body position for that kind of stuff.
Yep, that's a very good point. That's another space that's moving super fast. So, all right. So I think there is a couple of messages. Angelique has another question about database of AR assets that could be shared between artists. I'm not aware of any such thing, but they are gaming assets that are available. Maybe that's another thing we could put together a page, maybe to list those.
Yeah, I mean, there's two things there. Any 3D model you could convert to GLTF format. And so now your mileage may vary because the world of 3D model image formats is inexplicably still a very messy one. And, it's not like just saving the image as a different format. Some stuff works, some stuff doesn't work. But any Sketchfab is probably the premier resource now for people posting 3D models. Some of them free, some of them for pay. And then in terms of things going from Unity to Hoverlay, Unity is a company now with its own asset store, and there's many, many free and for paid assets in the Unity asset store that your mileage may vary. Some of them you can bring in very easily into Unity, and other ones not so much. And some of that would translate into Hoverlay right away.
Yep, that's a good point. So if you need contacts, if some of you have been asking for contacts, you can. So Casey has his contact on screen through, I think Instagram is probably a good place, at Casey Farina Art.
Sure.
And on Hoverlay, you have contact. You can email me directly, nicholas.robbie@hoverlay.com or contact@hoverlay.com. And we can follow up the discussion, or if there's anything you need, we'll be happy to help you with. If you have any last question, just go ahead, jump in or raise your hand. Otherwise, I think we're going to wrap this up and make sure there's a good recording of it available shortly. All right. There's no question, it seems. All right. So Casey, I want to say a big thank you. This was super interesting. Lots of great example. Just reading the comments, I think many of those who attended found this very valuable. So looking forward to our next session and your upcoming work as always. Thanks, Casey.
Thank you very much for having me, Nicola. And thanks for everybody for taking the time to listen and check this out. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.